One of our top stories today, and that's been the twists and turns in the British Parliament. Look, it does all get a little complicated. One thing you need to know, though, Boris Johnson's having no luck in Parliament. He has lost control, has not won a single vote since becoming Prime Minister there. The House of Commons rejected his push to have an election on October 15. Why? Because they're worried that he would then be able to rush to a no-deal Brexit straight after that. The Parliament has instead passed through the House of Commons an extension, a bill that would require an extension of that Brexit deadline. The House of Lords has now also agreed to pass that bill, maybe with some amendments, but pass that bill by the end of the week. Let's go to Dr Ben Wellings, an expert on Brexit and British politics from Monash University in Melbourne, who can hopefully explain things a little better than I can, give us an understanding of where things are at. What does this mean, Ben, in terms of the prospects now of an election and the prospects of this no-deal Brexit that Boris Johnson's prepared to do?
OK, hello, David. So I think that the prospects of the opponents of no deal in Parliament to agreeing to an election have just increased. As you mentioned, the House of Lords debated this bill late into the night, throughout the day our time, and they've said that it will pass by 5 p.m. on Friday, or at least it will be back in the
And how significant is that? Because there was a lot of expectation it would be filibustered in the House of Lords, with what was it, 100 amendments or so on. Now they've agreed they will pass it.
Yeah, I think there was a deal done. I mean, you know, that would have been a highly controversial move in a week of highly controversial moves, because of course the Lords are not elected; they are selected. And if they had delayed that, it would have created a constitutional crisis like we haven't seen since 1911, when something similar happened. So I think that is significant, and I think it does pave the way for the possibility of an election, because Labour, Scottish National Party, Lib Dems, Conservatives who don't want to leave without a deal now have that guarantee. Although, of course, it has to go to the European Union, and the European Union, 27 member states need to agree on an extension as well. So it's
just explain it to me now. So so the next steps here, as far as the British Parliament are concerned, that bill that says you've got to push out or at least ask the EU to push out the Brexit date for another 3 months, that will have to, once it's passed the House of Lords by the end of Friday, come back into the House of Commons to tick off any amendments that have been made, and then get royal assent. So that will happen by when, do you expect? Sort of early next week?
Yeah, over the weekend. They might work throughout the weekend, because remember that Boris Johnson suspended, or the technical term is prorogued, Parliament for longer than usual in the run-up to the beginning of the next parliamentary session and over the conference period in October. So the amount of parliamentary time for this is severely limited. But if that bill does receive royal assent, unusually it contains some wording for Boris Johnson to go to Brussels and ask for an extension. Now, he has to agree to do that. Of course, technically he's bound now.
He'd be doing it through gritted teeth, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that is not something he will want to do at all. But then the EU 27 have to agree to it. And of course, they've been remarkably unified throughout this process, more unified perhaps than anyone, particularly in various British governments, had anticipated, basically to protect the principle of the single market, but really to protect the Republic of Ireland, one of their member states. So I suspect that they will say yes to an extension, but they'll be wondering, well, you know, what exactly are you going to do with this? You've had two already. It sounds like I'm talking to some of my students, but you know, you've had two extensions already. What are you going to do with this?
Is the third really going to help? Well, I mean, even before we get to that, is there any chance Boris Johnson can avoid this now? Can he either not take the bill to the Queen for royal assent? Is there another tricky parliamentary manoeuvre that can head this off? Does he have anything else up the sleeve?
Well, you know, it's been a week of moves and counter moves, so you know, there could be some surprise waiting for us. I mean, the thing is that it might just run out of time. There is an earlier deadline, sort of around the 17th of October, when there is a meeting of European heads of states and government, you know, one of regularly scheduled meetings, and that would be the time to ask for an extension. The idea that there might be a different deal negotiated between now and then is, there's just no chance of that anymore. So, I mean, I suppose the thing to do is he might decide that he doesn't want to do it, which would set the executive dead against Parliament. And, we'd have another tussle for who's in control in Britain, which, you just lob the people in there as well because, the result of the referendum is referred to constantly. We've got this three-way kind of contest about who's actually in charge in Britain. So,
normally in that situation, you have an election to sort things out, right? If an executive can't control the Parliament, you need an election to resolve it. So, look, Labor for a long time been saying we want an election, we must have an election. They wanted, though, this guarantee there'd be no no-deal Brexit before holding an election. So if this does pass into law, this bill that we're talking about, does Jeremy Corbyn then agree to an election?
Look, I think that election's the only thing that's going to break the logjam. I mean, it could, there are three outcomes. The first is that it could actually just come up pretty much the same balance of forces that we've already got in Parliament. We can't discount that. But it could create a majority, one way or another, for Boris Johnson's, no deal Brexit, or for revoking Article 50, which would mean the UK staying in the European Union. But there's a lot to go before we get there because, of course, Labour Party is quite divided. We know the Conservatives are divided. This is really difficult for Labour as well. They've got a considerable number of MPs who are representing constituencies that voted to leave. But there's a lot of pressure for Labour to become a party of Remain. Basically steal the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party's thunder in the way that no-deal Brexit has stolen the thunder.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because it is confusing what Labor would take to an election if we're about to have an election. And technically, do they have to go back to the members of the Labor Party, to a party conference, to set that position? And what would that position be, do you think?
Well, conference did vote to remain, or no, I beg your pardon, it voted to have a referendum on whether to remain a couple of years ago. So, but you're absolutely right. The Labour Party's position throughout this, they've been trying to play the kind of constructive ambiguity card. But I think the ambiguity is far from constructive and has really just deferred a problem for them, which is, what will they actually do? I mean, the stated aim is like, let's leave with a deal, but let's remain in the customs union. I mean, it may well end up that is something like what the United Kingdom is going to get, which will, potentially speak to those people who wanted to leave the European Union, but also bear in mind the sentiments of those who wanted to stay. But my fear is that both sides feel they're losing here. No one's going to be dissatisfied, which is why it's important to get the process right, because if you don't have confidence in the process of the way that this has come about, or understand it clearly, I think that's another issue around Brexit, then you're not going to think the result is legitimate. And I think at least with a general election, there's more consensus on the way that elections are called and how they come about, rather than referendums, which are not all that well understood in the British political system.
Yeah, well, we can understand and forgive any British voter right now for being a tad confused about what's going on. But Dr. Ben Wellings, thank you for explaining it to us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, David.